Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Elevating Outdoor Kitchen Design. As we continue our theme of outdoor living design for the month of September, I have the pleasure of introducing today's speaker, Ashley Smith, Director of Architect and Designer Partnerships at Plana Group. Ashley, please take it away.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you so much to the NKBA for having me. My name is Ashley Smith, and I am the Director of Architect and Designer Partnerships for Urban Bonfire and Kalamazoo. I have been working in the outdoor kitchen domain for about 9.5 years. And previous to that, I do have a background in interior design. So I'm really excited to talk to you today about outdoor kitchen design in our presentation, Elevating Outdoor Kitchen Design. So throughout the presentation today, we do have a few learning objectives. So I'll go over those with you really quickly first. We want to analyze the key considerations for creating sophisticated and functional outdoor cooking and entertaining spaces. We're going to learn techniques for incorporating existing landscape and architecture into the outdoor kitchen design so that you really are creating those cohesive designs that feel very intentional for your clients. We're going to recognize the importance of the human element in outdoor living spaces. We'll spend about half of our time on this because really, to me, the most functional design is intentional design for your specific clients. So we'll go through some questions that you can ask them and things that you want to consider there. And then finally, we're going to be talking about how to create outdoor kitchen designs that prioritize clients' needs and also provide comfort while ensuring longevity. We do want these to be timeless designs that will last forevermore. So we'll go through some steps on how you can achieve that as well. So the way that we're going to do that is through 4 different topics. We're going to talk about outdoor living in general. I don't like to use the word trend, but it is written here, but we're just going to talk about the outdoor living trends and what we're seeing, as well as some predictions for the future. Then we'll go through the existing landscape, the architectural style, and the human component, because to have a successful outdoor kitchen design, you really need to consider and incorporate all 3 of these elements. So we'll get into outdoor living trends first. Everything that we're seeing is indicating that outdoor living in particular is here to stay. It is something that has gained in popularity over the last 5 or 6 years, but it is something that is continuing to stay at the top of popularity as well. So for me, that's really an indicator that it is something that is going to be sticking around and that clients are really choosing to prioritize. So as you can see here, this is a survey that was done by the AIA, and you can see that outdoor living is the 3rd highest item that's on this list. So it has gone down from previous years, but it still is a priority in clients' minds when they're considering doing renovations or when they're looking for new homes. It's still one of the top priorities for them in these special use spaces. And then outdoor kitchens, specifically within those outdoor spaces, are still something that are extremely popular. So we're seeing butler's pantries that are on the top there, but then right under that, you're seeing outdoor kitchens. And it's really just gone down 1% from 2023 to 2024. So even though maybe outdoor living isn't being prioritized as much, for the people who are prioritizing that, they really are making sure that they're including that outdoor kitchen in that design. And we're honestly seeing this more and more often as an included feature within any plan that we're getting. It's really becoming the standard for kind of that luxury build. And so if your client is looking for that elevated experience, it's definitely something that we recommend including. And we'll go through some tips on how you can do that, particularly for your specific client. So some of the added benefits of including an outdoor kitchen in any design, if your client is on the fence maybe, and you just want to have a couple of tips on how this can improve their outdoor living experience. It can increase property value. So this is obviously something that people consider when they're putting a lot of money into their investment. If there's going to be a return on that. It can expand cooking capabilities. So because outdoors, you're a little bit less limited in what you can include. You can have an open fire grill, you can have a smoker, you can have a pizza oven that gets up to 1,000 degrees. So it really allows your client a more robust cooking experience. They can try something new. They can experiment a little bit with what they're cooking and different kinds of appliances that they can be using. It can add capacity for entertaining guests. All of a sudden, you have that second dining area outside. So if you have people inside or outside, I find also barbecue or outdoor cooking tends to be a bit more casual as well. People are standing, they're leaning, maybe they're sitting in a lounge area. It doesn't need to have a designated dining zone like you see on the right-hand side here. It can reduce energy costs. So because people who are cooking outdoors are usually using gas or charcoal or wood, there's so many different ways that you can be cooking outdoors. So maybe you're using less of those energy costs when you're in the outdoor environment. And then I do find that it can reduce takeaway, restaurant, home delivery. For me personally, when I'm celebrating, I like to cook outdoors. And so maybe instead of going to that restaurant once or twice a month, I'm trying to choose that restaurant or recreate that restaurant quality at home with the different types of cooking equipment that I can have outdoors. Outdoor cooking can also enhance or encourage healthy eating as well. If you have a garden right beside your outdoor kitchen where you're planting vegetables or you have those fresh herbs, then it can really add that fresh element to any of your dishes as well. I already mentioned restaurant style cooking at home. You have fuller capacity. You can use different kinds of equipment outdoors so you can kind of recreate your favorite meals within those restaurants. And of course, outdoor cooking to me, I find is always just way more fun. It feels less tedious than cooking inside. I don't know why, but I just tend to have more fun with it. Biophilic design is something that we are hearing more and more often. It is not new. It's something that's been around for a really long time, but it's just now really being considered in the built environment, I would say. So, what is biophilic design? For anybody who hasn't heard of this before, the concept of it is that it's the human physical and mental well being relies on the quality of our relationship to the natural world. So, biophilic design is really the practice of bringing nature into living spaces. So, where the people are every day, you want to be incorporating nature into that more and more so that you can have some of the advantages of biophilic design. So, what does that mean? It means that you want to incorporate nature into our built environment as much as possible. There are a variety of different ways to do this. One of them is simply just choosing more natural textiles and materials. So, incorporating some of those organic elements within the home. It can also just be in focusing on sight lines. So, if you're designing an indoor kitchen, maybe you're prioritizing views for somebody who's at the sink when they're doing dishes or they're washing their hands. Maybe they have a beautiful view out into nature. You can also incorporate elements like water features or things like that. Those are kind of the bigger, more extreme elements. But just being conscious and trying to bring in nature into the design as much as you can will allow the client to take advantage of some of the benefits of biophilic design. And by doing that, you're really strengthening the connection with nature. You want to make sure that people are outside, or if they're not able to be outside, that you're bringing plants inside so that they really have that strong connection with those natural elements, because the boundary between indoor and outdoor is really becoming more and more blurred. In the past, you had a door to your outdoor area. Maybe it had a window in it, but you did not have these full walls that were opening up like we're seeing more and more now. So you need that cohesion between the indoor and the outdoor space. And it is making it a lot easier to bring those natural elements inside because of that wide open space that you have in between the two. And really, no matter what, no matter how big or small the size the outdoor space is that your client has, really just try to make it their own. Really try to prioritize it and make it a really special space that they want to be engaging in and that they want to be participating in. So, some of the advantages of biophilic design or some of the benefits are that it can reduce stress, it can improve mental and physical health. This is one of the reasons that you're seeing a lot of plants in office spaces. It can also enhance creativity. So again, those plants that you're seeing in design studios and things like that, it can really just help cultivate that experience. It can increase clarity of thought as well. It can assist in expediting healing. It can augment wellness, balance, and restoration. Being surrounded in plants has actually also been shown to boost self-esteem and mood. And hearing water or being near water can actually cultivate relaxation. So just by immersing your clients in nature, they can really take advantage of a lot of these benefits. All right, now that we've gone through the trends and kind of what we're seeing in the market, we're going to focus on the different materials and the different ways that you can incorporate outdoor kitchen designs into your existing projects. And we're going to start by talking about the existing landscape. So, with the existing landscape, the 3 points that we're going to be going over are considering environmental factors, so where your client is and the different environmental factors that they are dealing with, incorporating greenery, and we'll talk a little bit about sustainability. I know this is a huge topic that we could probably spend a full 45 minutes on, but I'll just talk about a couple of different elements that you can consider for sustainability in choosing outdoor kitchen materials. So, for the environmental factors, I will say if you are not a landscape professional, it is always advantageous to collaborate with somebody who knows about native plants and any invasive species and things like that. So, you really want to be incorporating greenery or plants that are particularly fitting for the environment that your client is in. If you're in a drought environment, as an example, you don't want to be bringing in tropical plants that really need a lot of watering. So, consider the environment that the client is in and then make sure that you're choosing the appropriate plantings for that particular environment. And then choosing colors and placement that complement what is already there is also makes a really cohesive design. So on the right-hand side, you can see there's an example of an outdoor kitchen here. The background is quite rocky. It's a little bit more arid. And so when they were choosing the materials for the outdoor kitchen pavilion, they went with that concrete and that wood. They incorporated some of those rocks on the right-hand side in the walkway there. And so they really tried to incorporate the existing environment within the new space as well. Not only does that increase the cohesion of the design, but I really think that it makes it look a lot more intentional. And so it doesn't stand out like a sore thumb. It wasn't an afterthought. It was really intentional from the beginning so that it really fits into the rest of the design. And then source locally as often as you can. Obviously, this helps with sustainability as well, but it goes into those other factors that I mentioned of making sure that it really fits within the environment that you're choosing it for. So some ways that you can kind of increase the usability of the space and other amenities that you can kind of include in the outdoor kitchen design to make sure that it can be used throughout different seasons as well. So that's another environmental factor. Some people have to deal with snow, like myself here in Montreal, high heat, extreme temperatures. So ways that you can kind of mitigate this is to have a roof for any of those winter climates. So not only will that allow you to put in heaters and things on that roof, but also just by having an enclosed structure or roof structure, it does kind of keep in some of that warmth. It traps some of that warm air in there. So it just makes it a little bit more pleasant to be out in that environment. And then the opposite of that, if it's a really high heat environment or a really sunny environment, shade structures are a really good feature. Again, you can include fans on there. I know outdoor air conditioning exists. This isn't something that I would ever consider being in Montreal, but there are lots of different things that you kind of can affix to these roof structures to make it a little bit more enjoyable as well. And then if you don't want a full roof structure for shade or for winter, but you do want to include shade, you can have these dappled light shade structures. So it's not a fully enclosed structure. It can kind of look like a really beautiful architectural element. And it also allows for these really beautiful shade features that you can kind of see that add a little bit of art to the outdoor kitchen as well. This is an example of a project that we worked on with a client, and I think it's a really good use of having kind of that shade structure, roof structure overhead. I think this is on a rooftop, or at least it's a little bit more elevated. And so it is really exposed to the elements. And so having that roof structure that will have this greenery that will grow throughout it will really increase the usability of this. It'll have that shade and also have that protection from some of the elements. Incorporating greenery is the second point. So there are a variety of different ways that you can do this. Green roofs are something that we're seeing more and more of. Hanging plants or climbing plants can also help to hide different elements maybe that are not as sightly or not as pretty within the outdoor space. Living walls are something that we're seeing quite a bit, especially in that transitional space, indoor, outdoor. And then for outdoor kitchens specifically, planter boxes are the things that we're seeing the most often. So I talked about the advantages of having plants when I was speaking about biophilic design, but when you're incorporating planting, you can also think of the different advantages of that can provide. So creating a focal point. I mentioned this a little bit already, but maybe you want to draw the eye away from something that's an eyesore. Maybe you have a generator or a pump or maintenance equipment that's outside that you don't want people to be looking at. So either you can surround that by a trellis and you can have climbing vines on there, or create something beautiful with plants. Or you can create a whole other area so that you're drawing the eyes away from that. It can enhance privacy as well. As you can see in the image on the right-hand side here, we do have that really large hedge between the two properties. This particular example is in an urban setting, and so the houses are quite close together. And so instead of having this massive wall structure that's maybe a little bit more solid in a stone or a wood, you have this really beautiful hedge instead that adds a liveliness and a greenery to the environment, which can warm it up a little bit too. It can provide shade as well. Obviously, trees are the original umbrella. And so incorporating any trees or greenery can allow it to be a little bit more of a usable space so that you're not out in full sun. And I personally really think that it can elevate the design. So I have an example of how that can happen here. You're looking at a fully functional outdoor kitchen here. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the design as it is. But if you add a little bit of greenery, you can see that it really enhances the design. So it really adds that little bit of extra element. It makes it feel a little bit more living, a little bit more organic. And I think it just really frames the kitchen really, really nicely. So incorporating greenery, I would say, is something that I definitely recommend. And then sustainability. So I mentioned sustainability is such a huge topic, and I'm not going to go into everything that you can do. I'm not a sustainability expert, but there are certain things that you can consider when choosing materials for outdoor. And that really is that you want to focus on longevity over everything else. So when you're choosing materials, you do want to choose or try to source materials that are non-toxic and ethically produced. You do want to choose companies to work with who prevent deforestation and focus on clean manufacturing. If you're working with wood products, you can seek out FSC certified products. This is pretty commonly used and is just a really easy little tool to know that it did go through some testing to make sure that it does have some sustainability aspects to it. Leverage natural renewable materials whenever possible as well. I think in the outdoor world, this can be tough because all materials are exposed to the elements, and so they can deteriorate a little bit more quickly. But just do your research and make sure that you're using the right material for the environment that your particular project is in. And then try to avoid materials that cannot be repaired, recycled, or restored. I would say this is really the biggest element in outdoor. Often, a lot of things in outdoor living, so whether that be furniture or kitchens or barbecues or anything that really does have to withstand the elements, they tend to get thrown out quite quickly. And so we really want to avoid that as much as possible. And so you want to choose materials for longevity, which brings me into my second point here. So try to avoid fast furniture and minimize replacement because really you want to avoid something going into a landfill. So fast furniture, it will really only last a few years. It might be a little bit more reasonable upfront. So any material that is built for longevity and that will last longer is probably a little bit of a higher investment, but it's worth it in the long run because your client won't have to be replacing it. So just little things to consider when speaking with your clients and trying to choose these materials that will last a lot longer than the ones that you will have to throw out in 2 to 5 years. In terms of design, do try to focus on timeless design. I know for designers, it can be really tempting to incorporate, I'm going to say fads or trends within the outdoor kitchen design, but you really want to create something that is timeless. And then maybe some of those less permanent elements like handles, or if you want to add cushions, if you want to bring in a certain color and things like that, then you can kind of put your touch on the kitchen through those elements instead. And then they can be replaced later on, but the overall design and the overall kitchen can stay as is so that you're not having to replace that. One of the ways to increase the longevity of any materials that you do have outdoors is to customize storage and protection for furniture, covering soft goods and appliances. So make sure that you are storing them correctly. And for any cooking appliances, do make sure that you're covering those when they're not in use as well. And that will increase the longevity of all of these different materials. Ensure proper maintenance. Those go hand in hand. So especially if you're in a saltwater environment, as an example, you don't want to be trapping any of that salt air underneath any covers that are not breathable. And so just make sure that you are maintaining everything according to the environment that it's in, which obviously plays into the natural landscape and the existing landscape that we're talking about. And then always do try to research alternative and synthetic products that can maximize the lifespan. So again, we're really just trying to avoid having to replace anything. If you do need to replace anything, you don't want to replace the full item, maybe just the element that wasn't able to withstand, or maybe that did get a little bit beat up throughout time. This is an example that I love to show because I think it's a really good architectural example of something that really fits into the landscape that it's in already. So all of the plantings really fit in within the landscape, and then all of the materials that were chosen for the kitchen, which is in the background there, as well as the home, really fit within the existing space that is already there. We're working with nature at the end of the day, and so it's important to make sure that every design really fits within the nature that it is sitting in. So we talked about the existing landscape. The architectural style is the next really important design element that you want to consider to make sure that you do have that cohesive design throughout the entire outdoor space. So some of the ways that you can incorporate the architectural elements is through mixed materials. So we do see this quite a bit where you maybe have a little bit of a mixture in materials. I do think these can be some of the most successful designs. And then whether you need to consider multi-season spaces. Again, I'm in Montreal, so the kitchen looks really different in the winter than it does in the summer. And so considering those kind of architectural elements, as well as multi-purpose spaces, maybe you do need to use it for more than one thing. And so how do you make that space transitional? Lighting is something else that we'll talk about. This is always considered within indoor applications, but maybe not considered so much in the outdoors. So we'll go through some of those. Proximity to the indoor kitchen. This is absolutely something that affects what you're choosing for your outdoor kitchen. So I'll just go through some tips when you're considering that as well. So for the mixed materials, I did mention that these can be some of the most successful designs. And I really think the best way to do this is to choose the material for your outdoor kitchen that is best fitting for the environment. I know I've harped on this a little bit, but really making sure that the material that you use can withstand the elements of the particular environment. This is the base. This is the base for any outdoor kitchen. So once you've decided what that material is, whether that be stainless steel, maybe marine grade aluminum, if you do want to have maybe a stone structure or things like that, then you're building out from there. So start with the base material and then make sure that you're incorporating it or other elements, other architectural elements that are within the home or within the outdoor space so that it does have that cohesive feel. So an example of that you see on the right-hand side here, these particular cabinets are stainless steel cabinets, which can have a really industrial feel. But because you've softened it up with these different materials, the cladding on the outside, you have the composite roof structure, you do have that wood wall to the right side too. So you are adding in a lot of these softer elements so that it doesn't have such an industrial feel to it. The client wanted to have stainless steel appliances. It was the best fit for their environment. But by adding these other elements, you've really softened it up so that it really fits cohesively with the rest of the space. Here's another example. Often when you're thinking of metal cabinetry, you think really modern design, but it totally depends on the environment that it's in and what you're surrounding it by. So by adding the stone on the outside, by adding the kind of black faucet and accessories and things like that, you're really allowing that farmhouse kind of rustic feel to come in throughout this. And it really does make a really beautiful space that seems really intentional and really thought out. Multi-purpose spaces and multi-season spaces, not every environment needs to consider this, but basically what you want to think of is indoor kitchens, right? And so for every indoor kitchen, it's never just used for cooking. It's where people hang out, it's where arts and crafts are done, maybe it's where homework is done. And so why not try to incorporate some of those elements into the outdoor space as well? So what can you use these cabinets for? You can really create a bar area. So in this example here that you see on the bottom right-hand side, there's no cooking equipment in here. It's really just used for storage, glasses, and kind of used as a sidebar to that eating area, the dining area that's just in front. I've seen a gardening station. So somebody incorporated a sink and then they just had additional cabinetry. And that's where they're storing their soil, their pots, their gardening tools, things like that. And then you can also incorporate homework or craft station. Maybe you have some outdoor elements like bubbles or things like that that your kids really love or their clients' kids really love to play with. And so having those outside just allows for that easy access and will increase the likelihood that your clients will use it, which is always important as well. Other ways that you can use storage cabinets. So maybe you want additional counter space, but your client doesn't know what they're going to store in those cabinets. You can put irrigation systems in there, any lighting controls. If you have audio, visual controls or anything like that, you can hide all of that within the cabinet so that you're not seeing those elements. You don't have those eyesores outside. And then you really want to consider how to extend the joy and the usability of every square inch of the outdoor space. And so maybe sometimes that means that you're maximizing the use of a corner by adding cabinetry out there. Maybe in the back corner, you have a bocce ball set, but you're finding that your clients aren't really using it, or they're saying, oh, well, we get back there and then we realize that we've forgotten the bocce balls or things like that. And so having storage out there where things live makes that zone really intentional. So making sure that everything has a purpose, it can have multi-purpose, like we mentioned, but just really make that intentional. Lighting, every indoor kitchen has task lighting, ambient lighting, and safety lighting. And so this is really something that you do want to incorporate into the outdoors. And I would say this is where you're coming into some of the biggest differences between indoor and outdoor, because you really need to account for this well ahead of time. So it's not just when you're designing the outdoor kitchen, but when you're starting the outdoors design space, you want to make sure that you're running all electrical lines and all gas lines and plumbing lines to the space where the kitchen is going to be so that you don't have to dig everything up again and start over. So think about this when the design is just starting and make sure that you do have all of the required electrical components for task lighting, ambient lighting, and safety lighting. One of my favorite quotes that I heard a landscape architect say about lighting is that you can use lighting to create magic. And that is something that really stuck with me because by creating different zones in the outdoors, you can have different lights on different controls. So you can really create a mood in a different zone. So you have your task lighting in the kitchen. That's your bright light so that you can see what you're doing. You're using sharp objects. You want to make sure that there's no mishaps within that space. But then over the dining room table, maybe you have an ambient light that's on a dimmer so that you can really create the mood. Once the food is done and maybe people are sitting around and enjoying a beverage, then you can kind of decrease the light there so that you're creating that ambiance. And then safety lighting is important indoor, but I think it's even more important outdoor. You want to illuminate any steps, any pathways, especially in those winter months where it gets dark quite quite early. Here it happens at 4 o'clock. And so any lighting that you have outside will increase the usability of the space and will make people feel really comfortable to go outside when it is darker. There are some sustainable lighting options as well. So less wattage bulbs. You can have lower wattage bulbs that use a little bit less energy, longer lasting bulbs, again, so that you're not putting them into that landfill. And there are tons of solar powered options as well. So if sustainability is something that's important to your client, definitely recommend looking into this. And light pollution is also something that everybody should consider when you're lighting outdoor spaces. If it's something that you want to learn more about, you can consult darksky.org. It can tell you all of the different features of the different lighting so that you know what to choose and what to look for when you're choosing these fixtures. This is an example that includes all three of those lighting areas that we spoke about. So in the very forefront there, you have the safety lighting. So you have those light on each step so that you can see exactly where the steps are. In the back, you have the task lighting. The way that this project achieved it is by incorporating a shelf and then having that lighting underneath that shelf so that the countertop is lit up. And then in the front, on the right-hand side, you have that ambient lighting, which is throughout the space as well. So all three of these are probably on different timers, on different controls, so that you have full delineation of those different spaces. Once you're done in the kitchen, you're turning off that kind of bright white task light, and then you have these really warm glows so that you're really creating that really inviting environment within this outdoor space. Proximity to the indoor kitchen, I will say that this is probably one of the most important elements because it does determine a lot of different features that you're putting within the outdoor kitchen. So we do have two different types of kitchens that we kind of break it down into. And so a satellite kitchen is the first one. And a satellite kitchen means that it is dependent on a separate area where maybe refrigeration is being done and also where all of the preparation is being done. So it's typically adjacent to an indoor kitchen. If it's not adjacent to an indoor kitchen, it's at least adjacent to an indoor kitchen zone. So maybe it's a butler's pantry, maybe there's a butler's kitchen or a separate area that has refrigeration as well as a sink preparation area and some of the elements that you will be bringing outside, but it is fully dependent on another area. An independent kitchen, as its name, means that it is not dependent on any other area. And so it's really more of a fully functioning kitchen, outdoor kitchen. So you have a greater need for space, for capabilities. So you're probably incorporating refrigeration out there, maybe a dishwasher, definitely a sink. You're thinking of all of the elements that an indoor kitchen would need and making sure that you're incorporating that outdoors. And it can even be a destination. Sometimes it's quite a bit further. Somebody's built an outdoor pavilion. So maybe the trek back inside to get the things that they need or to wash their hands is just not really possible. And so consider the distance between and make sure that you're incorporating the elements that are needed to make it functional. So the distance can really determine the amount of prep space that is available or that you're including, not as big of a requirement in that satellite space, but definitely a requirement in that independent space, especially if you have clients who really like to cater or to have large parties, make sure that you have a lot of preparation space. Cleanup zone, maybe not required in a satellite kitchen, definitely required in an independent kitchen. Can't have a pile up of all of the dishes and everything, and you do need to be able to wash your hands. And then it can determine the different appliances. So refrigeration is probably the biggest one. And then maybe a burner as well, or different cooking elements. Maybe if you do have that indoors, you don't need to have it outdoors. But again, if it's that independent kitchen, then instead of having to go back and forth, you'll probably incorporate those elements for your clients. And utilities are a big one as well. So for satellite kitchens, it tends to be easier because you're adjacent to an indoor space. You can bring out that electrical, plumbing, gas, all of that quite easily. For that independent kitchen, you do have to run the lines quite a bit further. And so again, you need to plan for this in advance, like I mentioned with the lighting. So make sure that you have all of those run to the area where the outdoor kitchen will be. And then when it comes time to do the full kitchen design, you're not limited by the plumbing or the electrical or anything that is not there. And you don't need to dig everything up again. I will say that can be cost prohibitive as well. So if your kitchen is on or your client, is on a tighter budget, or if they're a little bit more cost conscious, having that satellite kitchen typically means that it's smaller and you're not running utilities as far, so you save cost there as well. This is an example of a satellite kitchen. So the indoor kitchen is just to the right of the glass door that you see there. It's fully functional. It has everything you need. It has a garbage. It has a small refrigerator there. It has some storage, but really the majority of the preparation for all of these pizzas and everything that they're grilling is being done inside. So you just have those landing areas beside the appliances instead of full preparation zones. And then this example is obviously an independent kitchen. It has a lot more capacity in terms of storage. It has multiple refrigerators. It has a lot more cooking equipment. And really, I would say the most importantly is that it has a huge amount of counter space. You can have multiple cooks in here. I know that this kitchen gets used a lot for parties. And so they're accounting for having multiple caterers in here. You have a designated cleanup zone, cooking zone, and you're not getting in the way of each other. So consider this in the design as well. If your clients like to entertain and it is an independent space, make sure that you have different zones, which we'll get to in a moment, and make sure that it's large enough to accommodate a few different cooks within that kitchen. So everything that we've talked about so far, the natural or existing landscape, as well as the architectural style, determines the design of the outdoor kitchen, the different elements that you're using, the different materials that you're using. But the human component is really what makes it unique to your specific client. And so this is what we'll spend the majority of our time on, even though it is the last point. The things that we'll go over is designing for usability, again, specifically for your client. We'll go through some rules of thumb for space allocation. We'll talk about some specialty cooking equipment that we're seeing more and more of within the outdoor living space. And then we'll talk really quickly about other comforts of modern home that you can incorporate into these outdoor living spaces as well. So when you're designing for usability, some of the things that you really want to consider is how people will interact within the space. Something that I really love to incorporate and that we're seeing a lot of is a kitchen island. This has had its moment in indoor kitchens for a really long time, and it is definitely something that we're seeing outdoors. There are a few advantages of incorporating an island. It allows for that additional preparation space. It allows to really incorporate the chef within the party as well. So if somebody's cooking in the past, typically they would be off in a corner at the barbecue. They would be by themselves. Maybe they have somebody else who's standing around them and talking to them, but they're not really incorporated into the full design. Whereas if you're talking about an outdoor kitchen design, a lot of the elements or the kitchen can be the focal point of that. And if it's not, just make sure that you can incorporate seating within that space as well, because that will encourage people to sit with the chef so that they're not alone and they're still incorporated within the guest. So islands, again, can be a place to hang out, but it can incorporate in-kitchen seating as well. So you can have some stools, you can have overhang on that island so that you can have stools so that people can sit there. You can have a designated dining area as well, or lounge seating. But all of these, if they're incorporated close to the kitchen, will just mean that there's nobody off by themselves in the corner cooking and that they're really integrated into the design. And then take into account the primary use of the kitchen as well. So everything that I've said about integrating the chef within the design, that means that it's really the homeowner who is doing a lot of the cooking or friends who are doing a lot of the cooking. If it is a catered party, then some of the design elements don't factor in as much. So if your client will be using this, really, you want to make sure that they are able to entertain their guests. But if it's a catered party, maybe you're incorporating different elements. Maybe you're incorporating a warming drawer as an example, and there's less focus on having to interact with the people who are cooking there. And then really a big thing, especially when you're dealing with a smaller space or when you have maybe the cooking element is a little bit further away from the indoor kitchen, make sure that you have a natural flow within the indoor space. It's a little bit hard to see in the image on the left-hand side here, but this is a pass-through from the outdoor kitchen to the indoor kitchen, which I think is a really great idea. Anybody who needs to grab something from the indoors, maybe you have a team working indoors and a team working outdoors, but they can pass things back and forth really easily. And it's really easy for somebody to get from that outdoor kitchen to that window space. So you don't want them to be walking through everything, maybe with dirty hands or really greasy items. You don't want them to have to step over people to do that. So have that clear space to the indoor and the outdoor. Some of the design best practices that we like to talk about when you're considering outdoor kitchen design is plan for ample counter space. I think this is the biggest element that we see a lot is that people tend to try to overcrowd the kitchen because of all of these amazing elements that you can put in there. So they want to have a pizza oven and they want to have a griddle and they want to have a side burner and they want to have a smoker and they want to have a grill. Make sure that you have enough space to incorporate all of these elements. The advantage of having an outdoor kitchen is that you have counter space and that you have storage space. But if you fill it up with too many appliances, you're losing both of those things. So you're losing really the advantage of having the outdoor kitchen. Even a freestanding grill has two little shelves on the side so that you have a place to put something down. So make sure that you're incorporating that at the very least. And we always do say incorporate a sink as much as possible, simply because outdoor cooking on a barbecue often involves meat. And so you want to be able to wash your hands. Even if it's a little 15-inch by 15-inch preparation sink that only has cold water, anytime that you can incorporate that, we do recommend it. Two examples of kitchens that we have on the right-hand side here that are really similar, but one of them is a little bit more usable than the other. So when you're looking at this top example, you have minimal counter space, really just where those vegetables have been staged on that cutting board. That's kind of the only counter space that you have. So you can't do a whole lot of preparation. Again, if it's adjacent to an indoor kitchen, not a big deal. But the really biggest thing for me here is that you don't have a landing zone. So you don't have anywhere to put something down as you're taking things off of the grill. Anybody who's taking something off the grill here is likely standing there, may have a plate or a platter in their hand that they're putting it directly on. We want to avoid that whenever possible. You have limited storage within this kitchen as well. If your client doesn't want to store things outside, this isn't a big deal. But if they do want to keep some of the elements out there, or even just have a place to put the cover for their barbecue and their side burner, you do want to incorporate a little bit more storage. And again, there's no place to put a platter next to the grill. This is the biggest no-no for me. You do want to incorporate landing zones when possible. In the bottom image here, it's very similar in size. And I do understand that there can be limitations to size because you're working with an existing area, or maybe it is a smaller outdoor space. But if you can add that one additional cabinet that you see to the left of the grill here, it does make this quite a bit more functional. So you have ample counter space within here. You can have two people working at these two different zones, and you have additional storage that is easily accessible. Incorporating that open shelving cabinet can mean that somebody's setting the table while somebody else is cooking, and they're not interfering with one another. And again, the biggest thing is that you have the landing zones next to any of the cooking appliances here. So if your client is left-handed or right-handed, they have space on each side, and it's really easy to work with and easily accessible. I love to show this example because it is a larger space than some people have, but it's not a sprawling estate. And I think that the design of it was really well done, and it's really functional and intentional. So you have the cooking area at the back where you have the grill underneath that vent hood. You have the incorporated island, which is where you have the seating. So you don't have a designated dining area, but then you have that lounge seating in front of that as well. So anybody who's cooking here is fully involved in the party, and guests have a lot of different space where they can mingle and they can hang out. Again, I mentioned that outdoor eating tends to be a little bit more casual. You don't necessarily have those full dining areas. And I think this is a great example of that. You've got a variety of different areas where you can sit, which are all really comfortable and really well thought out. And then if you'll see in the background there, we do have a green wall too. If you remember, I did talk about that earlier. And so a nice way to incorporate that nature within this built environment. Some different tech factors that you need to consider in outdoor kitchen design that you don't necessarily need to consider in indoor, or maybe not as much. I'll go over really quickly. Altitude, just make sure that any cooking equipment that you choose can hold up. If you're higher up, there are different requirements. And so make sure that you're talking to the manufacturer to get an understanding of maybe the limitations of some of that. Corrosion, saltwater is really the biggest one that we see in the North American environment. Saltwater can really do a number on anything outdoors, basically. I mean, we see that even indoors. And so make sure that you're choosing the right material for that saltwater environment. Rain is not something that you need to consider indoor, but certainly something that you do need to consider outdoor. If your client does want to be able to use their space every day, rain or shine, incorporating that roof structure and just making sure that you're listening to your client and knowing that they do want to be able to use it no matter what will really obviously increase the usability and the enjoyability. Something that people don't necessarily know is the counter depth. So in indoor kitchens, we're typically looking at 24 inches. Outdoor, we're looking more in the 30-inch range. That usually has to do with lid clearances. So with a barbecue, you do have to open up a lid. And so you need that extra space behind, and also clearances to combustible materials. So sometimes that's built within that 30-inch depth, or non-combustible materials as well. There's always a clearance that you need to account for. So make sure that you check the manufacturer requirements for that. Temperature extremes, really hot, really cold. We have both of those. So make sure that you're incorporating elements like fans or heaters, again, roof structures, straight shade structures, so that you are making it enjoyable for the cook and anybody else who's sitting out there as well. Wind is another one that is really unique to outdoors. If the wind is coming from the back of a barbecue, as an example, because a lot of the ventilation is done through the back of a barbecue, it can snuff out the burner. So understanding prominently where the wind comes from, so the prevalent direction, and making sure that you're not having the back of the barbecue face that wind, it's a game changer, honestly. And so designing around the prevailing wind is something where you can add a lot of value to your clients, so they're not having to relight their barbecue. Maybe they thought that it's been heating for 20 minutes. Maybe they thought their pizza oven was heating up, and then they come out and realize that it wasn't the whole time because of the wind. So there are different wind guards and things like that you can consider, but just knowing where the wind is coming from and accounting for that, it's a game changer. Sun and UV exposure, UV rays can really deteriorate different materials outdoors. So make sure that you're including ones that are UV stable and that are made for outdoor use, I would say. And then darkness, we talked about lighting already. This is something that affects the outdoor a lot more than the indoor, I would say, because it does need to be a little bit more intentional and thought through. Space allocation. So we do have a variety of different areas that you want to consider when you're designing the outdoor space. And so the kind of five main ones I would say are the outdoor cooking space, so where the all of the cooking appliances are. You want to have that standing or sitting by the outdoor cooking space so that you can integrate the chef within the conversation. And then storage space is an important one as well, depending what your clients want to store outside, having that prep and cleanup area and that serving area. So these are kind of the different zones that you want to incorporate and what you want to think about when you're designing this outdoor space, especially close to that outdoor kitchen. You'll see that the storage space, prep and cleanup space, and serving area are all pointing to the same kind of range of cabinets there. And that's totally possible too. I mentioned that you have that multi-use space, so there can be overlap depending on the size of the outdoor footprint that you're working with. So within each of those areas, you can basically break it down into four different functional zones. So we have the hot zone, we have the dry zone, we have the cold zone, and we have the wet zone. And then within each of those zones, they do have a different task that goes along with them. So you want to consider the little ecosystem that goes along with that. So you have your preparation zone. You want that to be close to your cooking zone. You want that to be close to your serving zone. And then you want it to be able to easily clean up from that serving zone as well. So incorporate the flow, have a full understanding of how each of the different areas is going to be used so that maybe you have three different people working within this kitchen, but they won't interfere with one another because they know exactly where each of the zones is. We do have some rules of thumb for landing areas, which I've talked about already quite a bit, but we'll go into some more specific details here. So beside any sort of outdoor cooking equipment, we do recommend having a landing area. If it can be about 2 feet, even better. The bigger space for any of that additional preparation area is always important. So if you do plan on doing a lot of preparation, then make sure that you're accounting for that. But for the landing area in particular, it really just means that in this example, we're showing it on each side of the grill. Maybe you have your uncooked meat on one side, you're cooking your meat, and then you have your cooked meat on the other side, and those two don't need to interact with one another. So it helps with cleanliness and hygiene and everything like that. And then once you're done with that uncooked meat, maybe the platter that you're using goes directly into that serving zone. So having the two designated zones and two designated landing areas can really assist with that. Just makes it easier. You're not having to swap things out as often. If you do have a pizza oven, we recommend incorporating a little bit bigger of a preparation area there, simply because there's lots of different elements to pizza. And so you maybe need a little bit more space. Even in this particular example, I would even include the space over the dishwasher. Maybe that's where you're serving it afterwards. So you have that serving zone. You're prepping it next to the pizza oven. You're putting it in the pizza oven and you're taking it out and putting it directly on a cutting board, maybe above that dishwasher space. So account for a little bit more space there just because you need a little bit more space to maneuver and there's a lot more preparation that's involved. For the cleanup area, I would say a really easy way to incorporate those 2 feet on each side of a sink is having under-counter appliances within there. Here we're showing a refrigerator and a dishwasher. If you don't want to have a dishwasher outdoor, you can have 2 refrigerators, you can have an ice maker, but it really just kind of builds in that 2 feet of space next to the sink. I would say try to group in any plumbing together. That's why we call this the wet area. It just makes it easier when you're running those utilities. Same thing for the heat or the hot zone. You have all of your cooking elements together so that you're running the gas to one area. You don't have to split it off. For the serving area, again, this can overlap with the preparation area, but if you do have catered parties and things like that, you kind of do want to have that designated serving zone where maybe you're staging everything, putting those final touches on all of the cooking. This can be kind of behind the sink if you have that space. And again, it can overlap with some of the other spaces as needed. And then one that I do like to draw attention to is the drink station. So for any beverage center or any refrigerator that is maybe dedicated to drinks, always try to have that at the end of the cabinet run so that anybody can just come and serve themselves. If you can incorporate an open shelving cabinet or any sort of cabinetry next to it where glasses will be stored, that's also really beneficial so that anybody who just wants to grab a drink isn't interfering with that little ecosystem that we were talking about before. Specialized cooking equipment. So we're seeing different requests from people. And I would say that there's really no limitation to the kind of cooking equipment that you can put outdoors now, which I think is really exciting because this has evolved a lot since I first started. But there's been a really big evolution in the outdoor kitchen. So if you're looking at the left-hand side, when I started almost 10 years ago, if you ask somebody to define an outdoor kitchen or to draw an outdoor kitchen, this is typically what they would have done. So it's a grill, you have minimal counter space, maybe a couple of access doors so that you can access gas hookups and things like that. But it's not really an outdoor kitchen as we see it today. So now you're looking at the right-hand side, which is kind of a better example of what we're seeing more and more of. You're having this cabinetry approach. Not always. Sometimes we still have that access where we have, masonry or other elements that are from the architectural style of the home being incorporated into that outdoor kitchen. But you do have a lot more choice, I would say, when you're going to select the materials and the style of the outdoor kitchen. And that includes specialty equipment. So some of the things that we're seeing requests for are there's a lot more plant-based food that is out there. I think vegetarianism, veganism is something that's really gaining in popularity. And so making sure that you're including equipment that can kind of cook those specific styles of food can be really beneficial and where you can add value to your client. People do travel quite a bit as well. And so maybe sometimes they want to bring that cuisine home. Maybe they want to have a designated wok burner or they want to incorporate a tandoor oven into their outdoor kitchen. There's really no limit to what you can include. So where you can really add value as a designer is to ask your clients what kind of cuisine they cook. And so that you can kind of suggest specialty cooking equipment for that specific cuisine. And you can also ask them what they aspire to cook. So maybe, they've never tried cooking Thai food before, but they would love to cook more Thai food. So look into kind of what the options are and allow your clients to be able to experiment with their culinary choices in the outdoor environment. We're seeing a lot of people who are also looking for energy and time savers. I think some of the things that can be associated with outdoor cooking is that maybe it can be time consuming, especially if you're dealing with charcoal or things like that. So incorporating some of these quicker elements like high powered blenders, air fryers, pressure cookers, induction cooktops, all of these things can really be added to the countertop. So you can have a little plug in, make sure that you're incorporating those outlets within the outdoor kitchen. And then you can have all of these elements outside as well. And then cultural factors, fully understand any cultural limitations or factors that your client does have. If they're kosher, as an example, maybe you need two separate kitchens. Again, if they're vegetarian or vegan or looking to, again, maybe have those two separate cooking zones. Maybe one of them's a vegetarian, which is my household. I'm a vegetarian. My partner is not. And so when he's cooking meat, we have a designated area to cook that, and we have a designated area to cook the vegetables so you don't have that cross contamination. All things that you consider. And by getting to know your client, you'll really make the design specific to them. And that's really the most important thing at the end of the day. A big thing that we're seeing is flat top griddles. We're seeing a lot of requests for this. I think they're great. I do have an insert within my own barbecue for this because you can do so many different things on it. What I do suggest that you ask your client is, do you need a designated cooking appliance for this? Do you need a designated flat top griddle? Is this what you want to cook on 99% of the time? Or do you just want to do certain things on this? Because you can have inserts within standard or more traditional barbecues where you do have this griddle application. So it can just be an accessory instead of being that designated cooking appliance. And then that can help with not overcrowding the outdoor kitchen as well. Other things that we're seeing are pizza ovens. We're seeing a lot of pizza ovens. So whether that be a fully built-in custom pizza oven that's wood fire, or an example here, what you're seeing on the right-hand side is a gas fire pizza oven that's just sitting on the countertop. But we are seeing more and more of these, and there are a ton of different options within different price ranges as well on the market. So definitely if your client loves pizza, pizza party is always a good idea. And then we're looking at charcoal grills, wood pellet grills, wood fired grills. So any of these, what we call solid fuel grills, we're seeing more and more of. These tend to be kind of secondary appliances. I would say you're not necessarily firing these up on a Tuesday to cook for your client or for your clients to cook for their family, but they are these specialty cooking equipment that people do want to incorporate so they can experience different cuisines. Smokers as well, we're seeing these quite a bit. And then electric grills are something that's gaining more and more in popularity, especially depending where you are. Some of these are a requirement in some of the new builds. Comforts in modern home, really quick. This is the last point that we're going to go through. And just incorporating some of these elements, again, can really just increase the enjoyability and increase the likelihood that your client will use these outdoor spaces. So some things that you can incorporate, lighting, obviously, we've talked about. You absolutely need to incorporate lighting. I would say this isn't necessarily a luxury, but it is a requirement of that outdoor area. Heater. So if you're in that cold area, a colder environments, incorporating heating. Again, a roof structure is a really easy way to do that. Incorporating a fan as well can cool down, and it can also limit the number of insects. If you're really worried about insects, you can have a motorized drapery or screen. I will say you can't have this closed at all times when you're cooking because it is considered a wall. So just make sure that you understand the bylaws and the requirements for that. And then incorporating outlets so that you can have some of those smaller cooking appliances that we mentioned, as well as incorporating a TV. So if you want to watch the game your clients, that's something that's really important to them, make sure that you have a designated area that they can do this outdoors. And then other elements, it doesn't just stop at the kitchen. The kitchen is one of these elements that we do want to include in outdoor living. But get to know what's important to your client. Do they love to go to the spa? Do they want to have that kind of wellness retreat within their home? You can incorporate saunas, you can incorporate cold plunges. There's so many different elements in the outdoor realm. So make sure that you have a full understanding of what they want to achieve in the outdoors and include that. It's a really easy way to kind of bring that oasis that they're looking for when they're on vacation into their own backyard. Another thing that I think is really cool is these heated chairs. I've seen these a few times. Again, being in Montreal, I think that's just the epitome of luxury, being outside and being in a warm chair. I tend to get cold quite easily as well. So there's so much advancement has been done in outdoors. And so there's really not a limitation into what you can include for your clients outdoors as well. So put the thought into it. Make sure that you're understanding what your client wants and needs and incorporate that. So that is everything. I know it's a lot of information. So really quickly, these are the takeaways that I want you to take away from this particular presentation. Outdoor living is a priority. It remains a priority for the majority of people, and it's predicted to continue, especially with the emergence and popularity of biophilic design. People really want to be immersed in nature, and they're seeing the advantages of that. Consider the natural landscape when designing an outdoor kitchen and including environmental factors like greenery, sustainability, the natural landscape, what you're already working with, and the environment that it's in, and the limitations and challenges or opportunities of that environment. Examine the existing architecture and plan the outdoor kitchen accordingly. So take into account the use of materials, the purpose of the space, and the proximity to the indoor kitchen. I know we talked about that quite a bit, but it really does determine a lot of different elements that you're including in that outdoor kitchen. And then the human component really is the most crucial. So you can have a beautiful design that fits into the natural landscape, that fits with the existing architecture. But if it's not designed specifically for your client, they won't use it. Or you really need to limit that barrier of entry, have a good understanding of what your client wants to achieve with this outdoor space, and make sure that you're incorporating those specific elements. There's really no limitation to what you can do outdoors now. So do your research and just understand what all of the capabilities are. We do have some additional resources if you want to scan this really quickly, or if you would like to get in touch with me or the NKBA, we can definitely arrange for you to receive all of these resources. If you have any questions for me, obviously you can email me, but we will open it up to the question and answer time now as well. So please feel free to pop anything into the chat.
Thank you so much, Ashley. We appreciate such a wonderful presentation. So thank you for leading us through that. We do have a ton of questions, so I will just get us started. The first question comes from Karen. She asks, can you give us some examples of good materials that have proven longevity in outdoor spaces, like types of metal, wood, or fabrics?
I was really excited to see these questions come in, I have to say, as I was going along, because I love, when the audience is engaged. And I'm excited to see these. I think some of these got answered a little bit after they came in. So if you have a follow-up, just let me know. But for materials in particular, I deal with two companies who create metal cabinetry. And so I do have a bias towards a little bit of metal cabinetry, I would say. But I would say it depends on the grade of stainless steel or aluminum that you're looking at. So not all metal is created equal. If you're in a saltwater environment, as an example, you want to look at more of that 316L marine grade stainless steel as opposed to the standard 304 stainless steel. We also have some cabinetry made out of marine grade aluminum. I would say some of the little things that you want to look for is also making sure that all of the tinier elements, like all of the nuts and bolts, all of the springs that are in the soft close hinges, as an example, that everything is stainless steel. Sometimes a cabinet will be fully stainless steel, and then the handle that's attaching the cabinet is zinc, as an example. And so that screw that is attaching that handle to that cabinet is the first thing that is rusting, and it's making it seem like the cabinetry is rusting when it's not necessarily the case. So just those tiny little details I would say to look into. If you are considering wood, do consider a wood that doesn't rot, like a cedar. We see a lot of epay. Epay is really great as well because in some environments or in some bylaws, it's actually considered to be a non-combustible material because of the density of it. So depending on where you live as well, look into those bylaws, but that's where we've seen, we see a lot of people use that, and that's what we use in some of our designs as well.
Perfect. What a wonderful answer. Thank you. Especially those little bits and pieces that we might not think about.
Thank you for bringing those up. In the same vein, someone asked, what's the best countertop materials to use?
So we have a great partnership relationship with Cosentino. I will be fully transparent about that. And Decton is an amazing product for that. So that's their outdoor line. It's essentially like a porcelain. So it's a really ultra compact material. What you want to look for is essentially something that isn't going to be affected by UV rays. And you don't want anything that's too porous. As you know, for indoors, if you're using marble or things like that, it does need to be resealed. Anytime that you get something on it, you need to clean it up right away. Outdoors, it's just like 10 times worse, I would say. You have leaves that are falling on it potentially if you don't have that roof structure. You don't have as much control about what is touching that countertop. And so consider that when you're choosing the material. So I tend to stay away from those natural stones. If you do, maybe more on the granite side is what we're seeing a little bit more often, or like a soapstone, but it will need to be treated more often than some of those ultra compact surfaces like a Decton or other porcelain products that are on the market.
That's perfect. Kind of staying in the same vein as Secton, someone asks, they're seeing a collection that incorporates a lot of European elements like pit cooking, griddle instead of barbecue, induction. Is this a trend that you're seeing across market? I think you touched on this a little bit in your presentation. If you want to expand on that, that'd be great.
Yeah. I think it is just an expansion of the options. So it is a little bit of a trend right now. I did mention that I don't love the word trend because to me that's something that's passing, which I saw somebody said in the comments as well. I think it's just expanding the opportunity and the options that you have in the outdoor, just like indoor kitchens. You know, some people still like those heavy stainless items. They like to be able to see all of the appliances. And then you have other clients who like to have everything completely hidden away. That same thought applies to outdoors. And so with this new line, what I think is amazing is that it allows people just more opportunity to express their own design style so that it isn't so, I'm going to say masculine. It's been quite stainless and heavy in the past. And I think this is just a new version of it so that you have more options to be able to present to your clients.
Perfect. Thank you. We have a few questions about ventilation. If you can touch on some ideas to help with exhaust. Someone also asked about ceiling fans being close to a grill. Just if you could touch on some of those concepts of ventilation, that'd be great.
Ventilation is a whole other topic. To be honest, I've done a panel on this, so I can follow up with anybody who has specific questions. Let me know, and I can send you a recording to that as well as some resources that we have. It's one of these. It totally depends on the bylaws, first of all. So there's no one answer that applies to everybody. The biggest consideration that you want to think about is really if the roof surface over top is combustible or not. You cannot have any sort of combustible material over a grill or an outdoor cooking appliance of any kind, even if it's 10 feet up. That tends to be the hard and fast rule. So ventilation is often used to be that barrier in between that combustible surface and the cooking appliance that you have underneath it. So the rules are a little bit loose, and we do have guidelines as to what is considered indoor versus outdoor. That's the North American standard. It's, you know, if you have two walls, you can't have a roof cover, or if you have three walls, 30% of it needs to be open. So there's a lot of like little different details that we can follow up on a separate resource document. But basically, the short answer is that often ventilation is not a requirement if it's considered outdoors, but you need to have a full understanding of what the definition of outdoors is. I know it's not a great answer. It's a non-answer answer, but there's so many nuances that go along with it. So if you have a specific question, follow up on that. But it's that's kind of the best that I can do for now.
No, that's fabulous. And just to that effect, we do have an email going out with your contact information as well as the slide up here. So if you have very specific questions, reach out to Ashley. She'd be happy to help. Another question that we had is, what are some common challenges designers face when trying to integrate outdoor kitchens into small or oddly shaped spaces?
Yeah, so I would say that the biggest consideration for these types of spaces is to not overcrowd the kitchen. This is what I always say with urban kitchens. I call them urban kitchens in particular. You tend to have a little bit less space. And so you don't want to cram it full of appliances. You do want to have that counter space and you want to have storage space if that's if the clients do want to store things outside. Otherwise, counter space is really the biggest priority. And I think the nice thing about so many new appliances that are coming out, like induction cooktops and things like that, is that when they're not in use, they can just be stored away. But then when you do want to use them for those, few times a year, maybe that you want to be able to do something like that outside, you can bring it outside and you can plug it in. And if you've incorporated counter space, then you can use it within that. For oddly shaped spaces, this can be difficult sometimes when you're using modular cabinetry, but us in particular and a lot of different brands do have some customization options that you can use. And so for those types of spaces, I think that the best achieved design is one that maybe uses a mixed material. So maybe you have cabinetry for the functional part of it, where you're storing everything in your cabinetry. You have all of your gas lines and just like easy access through there. But then if you have a strange angle, or you need to incorporate a round element or something like that, then you can have a fully custom frame, or you can use a different material there where maybe you're tying in another architectural element from the design. There's lots of options that you can do, but don't think that because you have an irregular shaped space or a small space that a cabinetry option isn't a possibility. There is some flexibility within that.
Amazing. Thank you. Our next question is from Dawn. They ask, any recommended heated chair manufacturers?
Do you know what? I do have one and I can't remember the name of it. Let me look it up and follow up with me, and I'll make sure to send it to you. I saw them at a design show and I spent quite a bit of time in it, so I can confirm that it's quite lovely. But I'll let you know. I can't think of the name off the top of my head right now.
Fabulous. And then our last question today will be from Keith. Can you give us different types of steel cabinets that include insulation jackets?
Yeah, so an insulation jacket's really only required when it's a combustible material. So if it's wood, if it's like a polymer, if it's anything that will melt or burn, that it's considered combustible. If it's not a combustible material, then you don't need an insulation jacket. So for our brands, for Urban Bomb Fair and Kalamazoo, it's not required because we're using metal cabinetry. So that's really the only time an insulation jacket should be used. It's when it's in a combustible material.
Fabulous. Well, thank you again, Ashley. We appreciate your time. But before we end for today, I just want to give you the floor to give us any final thoughts for our audience.
I just wanted to thank everybody so much for attending. I am quite passionate about this. I've been doing it for quite a long time, and it's been really fun to see the evolution from where I started and what the definition of an outdoor kitchen was versus what it is now. And just, I love to see how many different trade professionals are involved in this process too. In the past, it was kind of just like landscape architects or landscape contractors who were asked to do this. And now you're seeing interior designers and architects, and everybody likes to put their print on this, I think. And I'm really excited to see it, and I'm really happy to get all of these questions today. So thank you so much for attending.
Amazing. Thank you again, Ashley, for sharing your knowledge with us. And a huge thank you to our wonderful audience, as always, for attending today's session. Until next time, I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye, everybody.